Hi guys, we are going to be using some sharp tools on a self-healing mat and doing some carving. This is lino carving, which this is soft. It feels kind of like an eraser, but a long time ago they used to actually do this on linoleum, which is where LinoCut comes from. And these should be done in the reverse. You'll notice my letters are in the reverse because when we apply paint to them and put them reverse onto paper or fabric, we are going to get the reverse image. So certain things like H and I, those will look the same, but this G, for example, when you go to stamp it, you will have the reverse image showing. So when we're doing lino cutting, we have to be very careful with our tools. We should always be cutting away from ourselves. And you'll notice in these little tool sets, there are different tips. You can screw, remember lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, unscrew this, tightens and holds in the tip. Carefully grab from not the sharp part, but just down here, pull it out, and then you'll notice inside there's just kind of like a little ball joint that your new tip will be supported in. So if I do lefty-loosey, I choose a new tip and I put it inside between the ball and the socket, and then I righty-tighty. So I can get new different shapes and attachments to do different types of carving. And you'll notice that some are very, very small. These will make a narrow valley type groove when you're carving. Some are very wide, so you can get a nice flat area removed. So the idea is to remove the areas you don't want printed and leave up high the areas that you do want to print. So this is a type of printmaking. Printmaking can be done on wood blocks, it can be done on styrofoam. A very simplified version of printmaking would be if you took styrofoam and made your design and then put marker or paint on it and then used it like a stamp. But this is really fun to do lino cutting and lino carving, but we have to be very, very careful about these tools. They're super sharp. And we always need to make sure two things: we're cutting away from ourselves and our opposite hand is behind the carving tool. So get in the habit of resting on top of your non-dominant hand. If you're left-handed, your right hand would be resting under. If you're right-handed, your left hand would be resting under. And so what you do is you put your non-dominant hand in front of your carving area, and then you just lean on that hand. It prevents you from, no matter how many times I say it, I even do it myself, your hand kind of starts to creep back over here because you want to be able to turn it and hold it. That's very dangerous because once you're doing a groove, if something slipped, this is very smooth and easy and soft to carve through, so you could easily slip, go too far, and gouge yourself. Those are not fun cuts. Sometimes those cuts are so deep they need stitches. So I'm going to stress this over and over to you while you're working. Have your non-dominant hand behind your working area. The other thing to keep in mind is when you are carving with a vertical stroke or kind of a 45-degree angle, you're going to be removing a lot more material. If you don't want to remove as much material, you want to flatten out your tool so that it's more even with the table. So I'll show you over here on the edge because I'm going to intentionally take off too much. Okay, so I can rest my non-dominant hand on the material so that it's not going to slip, and pressing down with my palm, and I'm resting on top of that hand. So my carving tool should never be in front of my non-dominant hand. So if I was too vertical, too up and down, I would be gouging out this huge chunk, which I don't want to do. But if you get to know the material, you can use that to your advantage. Maybe you're doing an intentional removal of some areas. But if you really just want to make a stroke to remove in between things, you're going to start to dig in at about a 45-degree angle compared to the table. Never really at a 90-degree angle unless you're intentionally removing chunks. So I started a 45-degree angle, and then once I feel it dig in and kind of get into the material, then I'm going to make sure that my tool sort of flattens out a little bit as I go. So this tip acts like sort of a shovel. It's removing a lot of material. So if I wanted to go right up against my design, I would probably switch over to a smaller, thinner tool that can remove a little valley of material. I'm switching over the tip, and I do righty tighty, lefty loosey. Make sure my tip is nice and tight before I begin. And I can put all my tips back in here and tighten this. That's how you should be working. I don't want to see people working with lots of sharps all around them and an open back. So when you switch your tips out, make sure you're putting your pieces all back inside and tightening the end. So this is a very fine tip, and I can use this to go right up against my design. And you'll see after I get in there, I'm going to flatten it out, level it back so that it's not removing as much. Now, when I go to turn, I always want to be carving away from me. So I want to turn my material as I'm continuing to push my tool away from me. Okay, and then I can spin my material back and around, and I generally start by carving away the very first place I go is the outline. And I get that nice and clean, and then I start to remove the edges. That, however, don't do that right away. You want to do that after you kind of know what you're doing and you get a feel for the material. First time you do it, I want you to play over here in an empty space to try and feel the way the tools are working before you go right up against your design. Once you feel how they work and you feel like you have a little bit of control over them, then you can go right up against your design and make the initial cuts for the edge. Remembering to always cut away from yourself and always keeping your non-dominant hand behind the carving sharp. Now, when I skip around a little bit, you'll notice that I just avoided this part. I'll come back to that. I would not want to carve in, because if I slipped, I would be carving away part of my E that I don't want to be gone. So a safer route for me would be to carve away so that if I gouge out or remove too much, it's going off the end and I can just kind of pick it off and get rid of it. So here I'm going to do this edge, and then you'll watch I'm going to flip the whole piece around and be always carving away from my design. So for the E, I'm going to do that in many little cuts. I'm going to do all of these little guys going away. I still have these flapping around over here, and that's fine. I can take those off in a minute. Okay, and stop, turn it, then make your cut. So in an area like here, I could go away to the center, then turn it and go away to the center. Does that make sense? There is another little tool in here that's nice for removing large chunks. It's almost like an X-Acto tool, and I do not want to see, you know, just a few tools in one and then like 8 in another. Make sure that you're keeping your set with your tool. We're going to be signing these out and we'll have numbers assigned to them. So here is one tool that kind of works like an X-Acto, and you can remove large chunks. For example, on my H, I wanted to show how you might remove that entire side piece versus just lowering the level. Okay, so this can be used to edge things. There's no reason for me to have this edge of my E. If I chose to make my stamp flush with the letter, I could use this to kind of come over here and slice all the way down. This tool, you'd work like an X-Acto, so you'd not be carving away from yourself. This is kind of the one exception here. You can slice it down and get a nice flush edge. You can also do it where you're scoring and you're not cutting all the way through your block. So for here, I might use it lightly and make a score so that I have a really clean, sharp corner on my E's. And then I can go back over that with a different carving tool. So let's go back to something that's like a very delicate little detail remover. For the sake of the video, I'm going to keep these out, but you know that you should be putting them all back in every time you switch a blade. And here with my detail tool, I'm going to go back over those little areas that I scored lightly so that they come out smooth and clean. Okay, so on this, I'm going to make a beveled edge all the way around my clean edge. And then once I have that outlined, that's when I can start to remove larger sections. So on the H, for example, I want to show you that you never are going halfway. You're never going deeper than half. So if you're removing the full amount, that's fine. But if I removed the inside of the H, this would be a really floppy stamp that might essentially snap in the middle. So I did not want to remove all of this in here. I just wanted to carve it down. And when I'm removing sections like that, don't go past halfway of your stamp because that will make it too fragile and they can tear and snap. So once I go all the way around my E, I would switch over to a flat, wide tool, maybe this one, or maybe something like this. They're slightly different. This one over here has a deeper groove, so it's going to remove big troughs. So I think that might actually be too beastie. We don't want that in there. So we don't need any beast mode in our little letters. We might use this for something like a giant LinoCut. Like if I was doing something this big and I had to remove a huge section, I might go to the beast mode. But remembering lefty loosey, righty tighty, sometimes you need to do a little wiggle jiggle, but always grabbing carefully with the palm, the finger pad. The pad of my finger is touching the part of the tip that's not super sharp, and going in between the outside and the ball. righty-tighty. Okay, now I'm going to be making my decision about what direction do I want all these lines to go. I can keep them all going in the same direction. Maybe that's diagonal, maybe that's horizontal, maybe that's vertical, but whatever you're deciding, remember not to go deeper than halfway. And I like to stop before I get too close to my pattern, my design, so that I don't remove part that I didn't really want to remove. So over here, this is an area that maybe I would want to remove. All of these little shavings, please keep them in a nice, neat, organized pile, because at the end of class, you're going to be expected to take this whole sheet all over to the trash and empty them in the trash. We do not want to have all of these pieces on the floor or all around the table. If we find that, please remember it's not the janitor's responsibility to clean up our art supplies. He helps keep our room clean, but he is not your personal maid. So all these little shavings, you should be keeping a little organized pile and getting that into the garbage can. These cannot be recycled. If I see any throwing of these, you cannot participate in this project. If I see anyone using these in an unsafe manner, you cannot participate in this project. These are as sharp as an X-Acto, and these could be considered a weapon if they're not used properly. So please be responsible. You're middle schoolers. You can use these tools safely. You know how. We've already gone through the safety training. So I expect you to behave responsibly. And with that being said, have fun. We are going to do another video on how to ink these with paint and how to press them on and get a good result. Today's lesson was just about carving. So remember to get your design on backwards. So for that, if you want to print out a G, cut it out and then put it, flip it upside down and trace around it. That might be one approach. Some people can just eyeball it. If you get a letter that doesn't need to be reversed, like an A or an H, it's up to you what kind of font you use. But this A was kind of a fancy A with a little flick off the side. So this point over here will actually print on the upper left when it's in ink. So when you flip it over, this one actually does have, this is backwards, even though an A could theoretically be ambidextrous. Here's a B. These were really hard. I might show you this one little last method you might find useful is when you're doing a small little area like this, or I did the same thing on these patterns, these designs in the H, where I stopped a carving trough or a valley. I held my tool and spun the material. So it kind of did a little spiral to remove that piece. Over here for a spiral, I can show you how I did that. It's going along like a little car on a road, and then I'm steering by turning my material. And then at the end for this last little swirl, I'm not going to do exactly what the pencil line shows. Watch at the end here how I do, I stop moving my tool, I hold it in the exact same spot, and I just do a little spin. So it's essentially going around on itself and cutting a little circle at the end right here. So if you go off of your pencil marks a little bit, that's fine. The pencil's never going to show in the end. It's really just what you're removing where we need to be concerned with. So I might go back and touch up this little swirl here and just ignore my pencil lines. Same with this one up here. I think this one looks a little choppy, so I'm going to go back in and make that smooth. Okay guys, have fun, but be safe. Thank you.